Think we're ready when you guys are.
Okay, we'll call this hearing, is this a meeting or hearing? It's a meeting, it's a hearing, to order.
Yep.
7 p.m. Before we read the hearings, why don't you give the spiel since this is a
Yeah,
hybrid hearing?
good idea. So thank you everyone for joining us tonight for the Cpdc meeting of Monday, March 31st, 2025. I am Community Development Director Andrew McNichol. To my left is Senior Planner Olivia Knightley. We are hosting a hybrid CPDC meeting tonight, members in person, public in person, and some public attendees over the Zoom. The members here tonight, I'll just go from my left to right, is Tom Armstrong, John Arena, Guy Mangianello, Chair Heather Klisch, and Vice Chair Hillary Armstrong. John Weston may or may not be here any minute now. So if you are, I think the board, it will be, we're going to have a small presentation to start, and then we're going to get into the public hearing for zoning amendments around the floodplain district. The board will probably, we can open to Q&A after the presentation if you would like for general question and answer. And then the intent of the meeting is to go through the bylaw changes itself, the red line version of the bylaw, so that we can see what changes are necessary for us to come into compliance with the floodplain. If you have public comment, please raise your hand so the chair can acknowledge you. Please introduce your name and address for the record. If you are on the Zoom tool, please, if your camera is on, you can raise your hand and we'll try to capture you, or you can find the raise hand feature under reactions. If you use that, we'll grab your question and comment. You can type your question and comment to us as the hosts, but we would prefer if you can try to unmute. There is a sign-in sheet out front for those in person. If you haven't signed in yet, please do. Otherwise, this meeting is being recorded and broadcasted by RCTV on all local channels.
Great, thank you. And when people do speak, is there a place where you want them to be? We're not normally in this room, or does it?
This room
does
is
it matter?
fully set up that you can
Okay.
hear from any spot. So I think if you can just speak loudly and clearly, the Zoom should capture you.
Terrific, thank you. Do we need to read the hearing notice into the
You do,
record?
if somebody could.
Is there a volunteer to read it into the record?
I'll do it. Okay. This part?
I think,
So
yes,
to consider the following proposed zoning bylaw amendments to the floodplain overlay district in advance of the April 2025 annual town meeting under section 10.1, floodplain overlay district amendments and reorganization to the language of existing subsections and the addition and organization of new subsections, including 10.1.2 boundaries of the floodplain district, 10.1.3 definitions, 10.1.4 reference to existing regulations, 10.1.5 designation of community floodplain administrator, 10.1.6 uses permitted in the floodplain overlay district, 10.1.7 conditions for approval for uses permitted in the floodplain overlay district, 10.1.8 base flood elevation and flood wave data, 10.1.9 abrogation and greater restriction, 10.1.10 notifications and submissions, 10.1.11 disclaimer of liability, 10.1.12 servability, and other subsections of 10.1 as found necessary.
very well done. Okay, thank you.
I have one question. Can I ask anybody in the room here, are you here because you have property that's in the floodplain in Reading?
Well, I didn't, and that's,
And you do? Okay.
well, that's the determination I'd like to find out tonight. I'm looking for a map. I want to find out exactly
Okay.
what's the
Okay.
increase in the zone.
I just didn't want anybody here sitting through the whole meeting just in case they have no interest in the meeting.
So, that's great, thank you. And I think we're going to turn over to the presentation. I also do want to note, and maybe this will come out in the presentation, we may have limited ability and time to kind of address, okay, where your home is in the map because the focus is on the bylaw regardless of where it is. And I know Andrew has been helping individual property owners and is open to do that one-on-one also, so you fully understand. So we'll see what the presentation is. We'll see what your questions might be after that.
Great. So yeah, I'll try to summarize kind of the 101 and why we're here tonight. So the Cpdc is here tonight to discuss floodplain bylaw amendments, which locally is an overlay district in your zoning bylaw. Zoning governs land use allowances and floodplain is an overlay in addition to some of those allowances. And we're here tonight because the FEMA level and state level maps have changed and the town needs to refer back in our local regulations and ordinances back to those most recent maps and language that the state and federal levels have enacted so that we remain in compliance with the National Flood Insurance Program, so that homeowners or property owners like yourselves or anybody within floodplain could purchase national flood insurance if desired, and we need to get that done before July.
Separate from attending this meeting or watching it on Zoom, if an individual's home did fall in or out of as a result of these changes, will they be notified separately either by the insurance company or the town of Reading or potentially both?
I believe your insurance provider would do a better job on reaching out than FEMA, actually, believe it or not. I don't believe you will receive.
You're
a
unaware
notice.
of any action that?
No.
Okay.
No, but I don't think anything is required, but your insurance agent would likely reach out if you did happen to fall into the floodplain, I would like to think.
Just a quick question. I don't really, Bob Colfer, I live on 91 Arcadia Ave. Is it going to be mandatory for everybody in this new floodplain to purchase insurance? I mean, I'm assuming through your bank and your insurance company, it's going to become mandatory. They're gonna require it.
Through some lenders, they can require that you have flood insurance. You are not required to go through the National Flood Insurance Program, administered under FEMA. So, which is really the goal of these policy changes, is to keep us eligible for the National Flood Insurance Program. A lot of individual providers operate within that, but it can get a little tricky.
And what I'm going to do, because I know that this is the kind of thing where there are always so many questions. I have questions also, that if we could let Andrew get through the presentation and hold questions from the public until he's done, and then we'll do a full Q&A.
Right, I'll try to be quick. So as I mentioned, the goal and CPDC's role is to ensure that our local regulations refer back and incorporate the new language and maps. The map boundaries are not in local control, established at the federal level through FEMA. And we do have the tools to show that, but again, not drawn locally by this board and or residents or staff. For the model bylaw additions, in terms of additions to our local bylaw, we are looking at adding a few new definitions to the floodplain overlay district. We're looking at clarifying some variance procedures from the model bylaw that they put in for clarity's sake, and that can be variance from the flood designation itself at the state level or local variances for setbacks or other zoning regulations. In our new bylaw proposals, we would be appointing a floodplain administrator, which in Reading's case, we determined the building commissioner would be the best fit for this role. And we'll refer back to the data and map as necessary to comply with the model bylaw.
And I do see there's somebody in the waiting room. So.
Thank you. So the bylaw requirements, Reading's existing bylaw in floodplain overlay district has been substantially maintained even in this proposal. The uses that are allowed, restricted, and prohibited within the floodplain district remain consistent with what is allowed today. So by right today, we allow in the floodplain municipal recreation, public water supply, drainage infrastructure, nursery and agriculture, and residential development in terms of single family 15 or other subdivisions abutting floodplain districts, which we'll get into in the bylaw itself. All of those by right uses are being maintained and not added to. We are adding some language per the state's requirements around recreational vehicle standards, which they're requesting because that's a thing that they see either federally or across the state consistently. Special permits in the floodplain allow golf courses, other recreational uses, and some accessory buildings to the by right uses above. Those are remained not added to, not taken away from, because the goal of this process was simply to seek compliance right now in the short time that we have. Prohibited uses include earth removal for fill, except for trenches, driveways, landscape, and accessory building foundations prohibited, oddly enough, when you compare those to above. But again, we are not adding more prohibited uses or taking away prohibited uses. What we have proposed is language clarifying that uses not described in the by right or special permit allowances are prohibited explicitly. We just wanted to make that clear because the language is not clear, and it's typical in your uses that you would say, if it's not described here, it's not allowed. So we can discuss that because that is a local addition in the bylaw. And again, maintained is that conservation review is required for applications within the 100-year flood zone area. Also, all wetland regulations are still maintained, just for clarity's sake. In terms of map changes, again, out of our control, but currently what Reading maintains on the floodplain district map is two predominant areas, and that's Zone X, which is your 0.2% chance of flood, or otherwise known as the 500-year flood zone, and the Zone A, which is your 1% 100-year flood zone. Those are existing designations in and around town. Most people receive the notice because your lot is either partially within the floodplain district or you're directly abutting existing floodplain district. Principal changes on the map include a major loss of Zone X, that 500-year flood zone area across town. There is some conversions from X to A zones, and then there are some slight boundary changes for the Zone A 100-year flood zone, and that is either being reduced in certain areas or expanded in certain areas. Just for example, for reference to the map, removed from floodplain in total is Timber Neck Swamp area. There is some existing floodplain around South Main Street that's been removed from floodplain designation. There is some wetlands along South Street, Meadowbrook, and some other residential parcels. Those have been removed entirely from floodplain boundaries. Changed from Zone X to Zone A, which is an increase in regulation. North Cedar Swamp, Town Forest, Birch Meadow area, which includes residential areas like John Carver Road. Some areas around Meadowbrook to the north again, in between Ash Street and Walkersburg Drive and Walkersburg itself. So try to show those. Those are the major areas we could determine from the maps that were being changed. So you can see here on the screen, hopefully see.
And there are two people in the waiting room. Sorry to interrupt you.
Good point, sorry. Thank you. Existing map boundaries, again, the orange on the screen is what is that Zone X, that 500-year floodplain designation, lowest chance of flood, but still can have flood occurrence. That's in the orange. And the blue is that 100-year Zone A, that 1% chance of flood occurrence. That's the existing map, and I can pull them up larger too. And the proposed map, you can see limited to no orange designations. So that Zone X is going almost completely away in the town of Reading. And some of the Zone A changes, which we can zoom into at later dates, but They revolve a lot around public land, but then a little bit of developable area towards Walker's Brook. And there is some encroachments as well into some residential parcels and some reductions. So the goal, again, just to be clear, is to allow private property owners to maintain eligibility for the National Flood Insurance Program through these changes. The next steps are to finalize the language with CPDC in the public hearing, bring it to town meeting for a vote in April 2025. We're gonna ask or try to ask that if you have questions about your specific property, because CPDC's role is the bylaw language. If you have questions about your specific property in the map and what's changing, we'd encourage you to reach out to us at either the planning domain, planning website. Our cards are right out front here. We can share our email in the chat as well for the Zoom. We're here all day, almost all day, Monday through Thursday. If you wanted to swing by, we can walk through your property. But specific property information, we'd ask to try to do that in a one-on-one setting so that we're not gonna scroll through 100 different properties tonight. But otherwise, that was kind of the general gist of the proposal here, and we can stop maybe for brief questions and answers and then jump into the bylaw itself.
Great, thank you. If you don't mind, also, I have a question that I'd like to start with. The slide on what was removed and what was changed from a 500-year flood to a 100-year flood was really helpful. Should one understand from that slide that no areas were added? Are there areas that were added as well?
So some of the changes.
I know we're not gonna do the math, but just
Yeah.
for understanding.
So there were some boundary extensions on zone
Okay.
A as well, and that includes some converted areas.
Thank you.
Rather than reduce it to the map, has this been tabulated in a street and house numbers, so that people can just look up their address?
There is not, I don't have the GIS layer from the FEMA map. So I can't overlay it to our parcels and then like pull out the new parcels,
It'd
so.
be so much, well, that's one way to do it, just look at the differential change, but if you don't know where you are at the moment, it doesn't help.
Right, so come July, I would assume we'll get the GIS data when it's, both the maps are fully enacted, and then we can do that. But we need the bylaw changes before July so that property owners remain, yeah.
So the best way for anybody to find out how their property's been affected is if they are getting comfortable at reading the map, to zoom in to the map viewer that's there, contact you, email planning@readingmath.gov, etc. Yeah, Guy.
I would advise them to call their insurance carrier.
Agreed.
Because they're the ones that are gonna pop it into a tool and it's gonna tell you right away whether it is or. I would caution you on the maps. They seem pretty accurate. They're never 100% accurate,
Right.
just because it looks like it may or may not. And then the other thing to think about too, and I still believe this to be true, but again, check with your insurance carrier. The flood zone overlay has to actually touch your physical home structure, not just be on your land.
Correct.
So if it goes on a corner of your land, but it's nowhere near the home, it's not gonna, it shouldn't.
That's
impact
a
your
good point
insurance.
of clarification, it's gotta hit your structure.
I just went through one and that was the case, so I think, again, check with your insurance provider. I had one where it didn't touch the building, so we did not need flood insurance.
Okay.
Again, I don't know with certainty, but
Other questions?
Is there a way to see this map? Is there any agency right now that can produce this map?
the map exists, I'm looking at it right now, there's a link. Andrew, that's a state
That is. the
tool, right?
state
There's a
tool, yeah.
map
Too much
viewer
will
and there's
even-
a link to it
Mass
from,
mapper?
yep, there's a map viewer and there's a link to it from CPD's webpage.
FEMA map,
Right?
hazards-fema.maps@arcgis.com.
Yeah, we can share that out, it's on the page, we can try to blast that too.
Just for the sake of discussion, I'm looking at a PDF version that's been moved around. Would you mind putting up the FEMA map so we could take a peek at it?
In the spirit of,
the same thing.
Right, people online can't see that.
Yeah. So if I could ask if the point of the bylaws in Reading, we're just conforming with the state? Is that the point of the bylaw changes? We're just gonna conform with the state, or are we becoming, Andrew said the word restrictive, prohibitive, those are scary words. What is the intention of the bylaw change? Because if you live in one of these properties and you had an intention of doing a driveway, you had an intention of putting an addition on, what would the changes in the bylaw do to those plans?
I think that's a great question. Andrew's probably gonna fill in the holes where I miss, but yes, the intention of the bylaw update is to come into compliance, conformity, if you will, with the state model bylaw, which is driven by federal programs. So basically to align our bylaw with everything we need to, so that homeowners who need flood insurance can access the National Flood Insurance Program. What I did hear Andrew say is that for folks whose properties are moving from, say, the 500-year floodplain to the 100-year floodplain, as we go through there, you may find yourselves in a more restrictive set of bylaws, some more restrictive codes, if you will. Not because the town of Reading is doing anything different, but because your property is now in a different frequency of potential frequency of flooding.
So, and again, that, I know the maps, if you've ever looked at FEMA maps, you look at the side of a lake, and the one side of the lake will be flat, not in a floodplain, the other side of the lake will be 15 feet elevation, that's in the floodplain. So my confidence level sometimes in the map is a little bit iffy, but to the standpoint of the bylaws in Reading, I guess the concern is becoming more restrictive when you have, a home in that floodplain, right? I would ask that these bylaws are not more restrictive. That the focus of it is, you're gonna get insurance, and an individual's gonna have to pay for what they built, right? But the opportunity to build is what the key is, right? That's the value of your home. So, the word restrictive, I understand if we go through our normal Concom process for a build, but to create a separate bylaw that becomes more restrictive. I understand the insurance aspect of it, that just become eligible. But why are we tying in any type of building prohibitive restrictions into the bylaw? Let the Concom do that.
So I may turn it over to Andrew. I want to clarify one thing, is that this is not a new bylaw.
Right.
This is updating a bylaw for the updated, to be in compliance with the updated state model bylaw, updated federal requirements. So what we are creating is not more restrictive than what is in fact required by the state and the nation. Does that make sense? And it's not new, but we have to update and tweak some things in order to be in full compliance. How did I do?
Yeah, and then the compliance part of it, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, guys, is just so that people can still opt into the National Flood Insurance Policy. If we don't comply, people who are, say, people that are in it today that have that policy, they will no longer be eligible for that policy.
Because of our town bylaw.
Because we don't comply with the state and federal bylaw.
And so that's also why we're doing it on a fast track, to get it done in this April town meeting before the new requirements all go into effect in July.
It kind of sometimes in the lack of a presence of a bylaw, you default to the next layer up, which would be the state, right? But if we have one.
We have. And I think specifically we're going over the changes to it, right? So why don't we dive into that? Because I think sometimes the terms can be scarier than when they actually are.
So did you have more presentation, Andrew?
No.
Okay.
Restricted is a big word. It's a big word.
And that's a really good question, because it's, again, as we go to town meeting, we want to be clear with our words. So
Right.
thank you, yeah. Any other questions at this point
Checking
from
on the
anybody
Zoom,
here?
We haven't seen him.
Jonathan Weber, 84 Hutchron Street. I got a few questions. I had a few written down. You answered a couple of them along the way. I appreciate that. Obviously what's driving this is compliance with Fed and the state. And any opportunity they have to make it a little more restrictive on people is always a direction to go. I think my concern is that you're going to put a whole bunch of people into this position of they have to have this insurance. Because as soon as the insurance agencies see it, you're now jacking up their insurance. And you're doing that on property that's probably going to have restricted usage on it going forward. Our neighbor down the street just tried to put a garage in. He basically was told almost 60% of his lot he can't do anything with. So my issue is to the tune of $10,000 on average a year, renting from the city of the town of Reading, which is basically what we do with our property. That's pretty restrictive, telling people that they can't use their property for things. I'd also like to know, how does this impact easements, waterways, things that get done in those areas? Is there a clean out process to make sure those waterways are open? Because that's one of the problems in this town, is that we have floods in this town because the waterways are not open. And that is a problem. And I live near the baseball field, and we have it's a drainage ditch that is called a dry stream.
Retention pond.
It's a dry stream or whatever. And that only gets filled up, for the most part, when they dam everything up for Castine Field. And by the way, I'm all for making that a hockey rink, great, in the winter. But that pushes everything back into the neighborhood. And those types of things go on, and it really doesn't comply with what we're talking about here. You know what I mean? Like, we're able to dam up the mighty Aberdona River.
It's man-made.
And, after it comes out from underneath the high school, and now we're pushing water back into people's yards, and now telling them that you're in a floodplain, 100-year floodplain. Now, just for the record, everybody in our neighborhood's got a sump pump. We get it. And this does give opportunity to be part of, you keep saying it gives them the option or the availability to go after the national insurance, the flood insurance, or use it if they choose. It's going to be mandatory, because insurance companies are not going to insure your structure without it once you get put on that list. And that's a big issue, going from 500 to 100. And that's a lot of money. As I said, on top of $10,000 a year on average, that's a lot more money for people to be paying. And when you've got elderly and you've got individuals on limited income, it's a big challenge. Now, what I'm reading in the room is you really don't have a choice. You can't say no to this. Right? Am I incorrect in making
Yes, I
that
was
statement?
going
I'm
to
not
offer-
trying to be
I was-
funny. I'm not being confrontational. I'm just
No.
stating a fact.
No, I was going to address the first part of your question first and then the second one, but the first part is, you're right, the town is not the entity that's saying, oh, you're now in the floodplain. This is data. The world is getting a little wetter. It's data, it's at the federal level. So what our role is to ensure that our bylaw, again, allows people to access, especially if they have to, the National Flood Insurance Program. But yeah, who is in and who is
But in-
out is not a town decision.
But in doing that, people are going to get caught in the gears of their own private insurance along the way, is what's going to take place. Is what I'm hearing.
If they're in the-
Us changing, adapting the bylaw on a national level isn't gonna change whether they are.
It's already been done,
Are not in a floodplain.
but it's already been done. So when the feds changed it, it changed it for everybody.
Andrew, is that accurate?
Right? That flowed downhill.
So we're looking at the state of Massachusetts model bylaw to comply with their model bylaw from the state level, who's derived from the national level on different ways, but period.
And
Essentially,
yeah, and you know,
yeah.
just to answer your question precisely, I don't know, I mean, are the new flood maps nationwide, or did they do them, you know, by portion of the
I
country?
believe it's a nationwide.
I think it's a nationwide
I'm on
update,
I'm on
yeah.
the, I'm on the FEMA website now. You can look all this up online live. My sense is unless you were in a 500 zone and are now in a 100 zone, i.e. risk increased. If you're not in that subcategory, you're no worse off than you were before. There are a few areas of encroachment where you weren't in, now you're in a 100 or 500. But it's really the larger areas that were 100, sorry, were 500, you know, 2 parts in 1,000 chance. Moving to 100, 1 part in 100. That's where your risk went up, and that's the case you're talking about. You need to take this.
Anything in the John Carver Birch Meadow area, just all the way up Winthrop Street,
I don't
I
know,
think fell into that. If
Because what
I recall, the orange
okay,
moved its way up the street.
what Andrew listed there was the Maya
And,
signs.
look, to your point, we can't go through every, I agree with that.
Yeah,
But
and it is something that every property owner, every homeowner, every property owner, in my opinion, should figure out where they sit there, and our planning staff are wonderful and will help you figure that out, and you should talk to your insurance.
That's kind of like lighting the candle. though.
Yeah.
Well, and this-
I don't wanna make
Just
that
for the
public.
record, just for
And
the
that
record,
is
it's like yelling, I
also,
might be in a
it's kind of
public-
like, none of us should be
Oh,
up
yeah.
here giving tax advice, none of us should be up here
Yeah.
giving insurance advice.
Right.
Nobody here should be giving insurance
I do not
advice.
play an insurance
Right?
agent.
None
We
of us
do-
are qualified.
We do bylaws, and we'd love to know what you think about our bylaws.
So my general answer is too many, but it's just where I
These
come from in
particular
general.
ones.
So that's really all I had was, just how much does it restrict people's property use? And, you know, if they're going to build, how does this affect getting permits and that type of thing? Because I think anytime, as I said, you've got individuals who are paying for 1/4 of an acre, in taxes, and they can only use 1/8 of an acre, that to me is something that I think shouldn't be stamped into a bylaw. I think that's something that, you know, needs to be looked at.
Andrew, you look like you want to respond. I want to say something that I want to make sure is accurate, but.
I was just gonna reiterate again, we're not adding nor taking away any uses that are already allowed in the floodplain. And there is ways to build in the floodplain to it, and you can compensate with storage and add drainage and things of that nature in like high level flood zone areas. If the town wanted to see that happen, we could allow that as well. But a majority of our floodplain is wetland, town road wetland, public wetland, and there's some buffer zones. We haven't found a new structure that wasn't in 100-year and now in 100-year. Doesn't mean on the map, I just haven't found it yet, but we haven't seen a new structure be added like entirely within the 100-year floodplain when it wasn't originally before. So
Thank
we'll
you.
keep looking.
And so a couple of other things that I want to make sure are accurate, as I say them, maybe after I say them. One is that I don't believe our proposed bylaw adds any more restrictions than what is required. I mean, a town could say, oh, as long as we're at it, we'll restrict X, Y, Z thing. We're not doing that. We're coming into kind of the minimal compliance with the state and federal requirements. And the other thing that I want to reiterate that Andrew said is that nothing in this changes the wetlands bylaw. The wetlands bylaw that is administered by the conservation agent who may come out and tell you what you can and can't do. That's not changing with this at all. This is only related to the floodplain, which, you know, there are overlapping areas, but we're not changing the wetlands requirements.
And to be clear to you on that point, wetlands have buffer zones associated with them, 25-foot, 35-foot, 100-foot. Flood zone does not, floodplain does not. There's no buffer from floodplain. You're either in the floodplain or you're not.
Okay. That being said, thank you for all of your answers, and I appreciate all of you folks doing this for the town, so. I
Thank
know,
you.
I know I sound like. I just, you know, when
I
it
want to make
comes
sure
to
nobody else has
restricting
questions before, and then we'll come back to you if that's all right.
We had one question on the Zoom from John Barmoy, just asking and confirming that the changes being made are just to comply with state and federal requirements, without which our residents are unable to keep, or in some cases procure, national flood insurance. and then asked, did you say FEMA made these designations and not the town?
Yes,
Yes and yes.
Yep.
So that was yes and yes.
Yes and yes.
That was a nice summary.
That was nice.
Any other questions? I know you have them. We'll come back to you. Just want to get others. Anybody else online? Questions or comments at this point? Yes, please.
The letters that went out in the mail, they were just to certain people that.
And if I could ask you to give us your name and your
Rita
address.
Weska, I live at 31 Latham Lane.
Okay, thank you.
So we did try to notify anyone whose parcel was partially within the existing floodplain district or directly abutting the floodplain district. In evidence that in the case that maybe there was some expansion of boundary, that they might want to know. So not required, but we did that mailing, to try to notify as many people as possible on these changes so that they could come to us and see what's happening for their specific property.
Okay, because I looked at the existing map, I just did it online. And my property, I've been there 42 years and my property was not on in the flood zone. So I didn't know if now I'm in a flood zone or I'm not in a flood zone.
Please reach out to us tomorrow and we're
Okay.
happy to take a look,
Okay.
and see what we can find for you.
All right.
Yeah, it's probably best to characterize it as the very best attempt at getting the people who are in or abutting. But as Guy already pointed out, sometimes maps are funny. So people, may have been included that aren't actually abutting or vice versa, but with the best available information.
I'm gonna share the bylaw.
There's also a process to remove yourself from a flood.
There is.
So it's called a BOMA.
Yeah,
A little
it's not
involved.
very,
It's involved. It's very involved.
yes, it is very.
You need a survey.
Yeah.
So if. that
Oh,
was-
yes,
that was gonna
back
be-
to you. Thank you.
Well, that was gonna be my question. How do you remove out, if I have to do a survey, how was the survey performed initially? What data was gathered in it, and then you're gonna turn around and tell an individual, you have to get a survey for somebody that should have surveyed something already, right? So then you kind of like, oh, you're paying to get yourself out. I understand that, but
I'm with you on that one.
yeah, so the other thing is a discussion about a variance for setbacks. Anybody that's going to be engaged in a floodplain property, is there anything that we should consider in the bylaw that would help an individual that now owns one of these properties that would be helping them for a variance for a setback? Like you're saying, if I can only build within 100 feet of a buffer zone, a lot of times in Reading, we know that covers a huge portion of somebody's property,
Oh, yeah.
but yet we've allowed that. Is there any consideration for now folks who have been impacted by this in the bylaw that just says, and maybe a loose ended, if that's the right term, some, thought consideration will be given to individuals who are, or property owners that are now located that have been rezoned into a flood. Is there anything?
So I won't speak for zoning board, but what we've seen in the past, so the criteria for variances are set at the state level. One of them is uniqueness of property and explaining why your proposal needs a variance. More often than not, wetlands, floodplain, or other non-buildable areas, good justification to variance criteria, because I can't build my by right addition over here because it's wet or in floodplain, so I have to put it over here where it's tighter, thus I need a 5-foot variance for a 10-foot setback, and that can at times be strong justification for one of the variance criteria, but there's nothing, I guess, locally, because that criteria is set at the state, and then it's interpreted by the zoning board for each individual application, but
And is that in here now, or is that something we need to consider to make sure it's in there?
There's
Is there room for
somewhat
it? There's-
variance
There was some language about
existing.
variance.
It's 10.18,
yeah.
10.1.8.
The clarifications proposed when we get there, or additions proposed, I should say, are the model bylaws way to let applicants know that if you want a variance from the flood designation in and of itself, you would trend towards the state building commission, I believe. Local variances relating to floodplain have some administrative needs from the town. Just to inform property owners that are seeking local variances and that are in the floodplain. But it's not justification or like kind of criteria for a variance. Not that we couldn't consider those, but again, variance from zoning is criteria at the state level. Or criteria.
So Andrew, you look like you would like to go through the amendments themselves.
That was my plan tonight. We can take as long as
What
we
I'm
want.
thinking is, I'm thinking two things. One is if you could zoom in a little bit,
Yeah.
it'll help everybody see it. And maybe you could describe like section by section, like
Yep.
we'll describe the section, the changes that are made. We'll pause, see if people have questions, comments, and move on to the next section. Like we'll take it in its entirety,
Yeah.
each section in its entirety. Does that
Perfect.
sound good to, we've got a intimate enough group here. I think we can handle questions that way.
I agree. So just for clarity's sake too, this is the existing floodplain overlay district found in your zoning bylaw. The language in red is the proposed additions or removals that bring you to compliance with the state model bylaw. So everything in red is the proposed change. Everything in black is actually already existing. So as we start the floodplain bylaw, it's got a statement of purpose, as most districts do. That was actually exactly similar to the model bylaw. No changes are necessary in terms of the statement of purpose for the floodplain overlay district. What we then have is reference to the boundaries of the floodplain overlay district. And to summarize this change is what we're doing is referring back to the new map date of July 8th, 2025 that is coming out in the near future for the flood mapping. And then really getting rid of, per DCR comments, some specific panel numbers that we just don't need to reference in our bylaw. Because we can reference simply the zones of floodplain rather than specific panel numbers, because panel numbers can be subject to change just as well as the maps. So, and the last addition here was just stating that the maps and bylaw are available across the town from the town clerk's planning, building, conservation, and engineering division.
Okay, pause
Can we
for any
make-
questions?
Yep.
Can we make sure when we go to town meeting that those documents are part of the report provided to town meeting members?
Which
Which
documents?
documents?
So the firm and FIS report incorporated herein.
Yep.
Those are part of folks so they can review it.
Yep.
Yes, we have a question.
Yes, thank you.
Name and location
Yes, Dave
first.
Rauchi, Arcadia Ave. So I'm backed up to conservation in wetlands. And like you mentioned, the 100-foot buffer zone and so forth. I personally am on a hill, so I have not, shared into water, which is, damaging at times and stuff. But my main question is, with all this 500, 100 years, where is the most zones that we're having the difficulty with? And as Jonathan pointed out, with the second step, is there gonna be town or federal, money to comply with the floods to correct the flood zone? I mean, if we're gonna vote for something and we're gonna change the not change the bylaws, go along with the bylaws and stuff, what are they gonna do for us as citizens of?
To reduce the potential for flooding?
Yes.
That's a very big question. I don't know, Andrew, how you might like to, if there's even a really good answer for that.
Don't know if there's a good answer. Lowland is lowland at times, but
I think the nature of a 500-year flood is you ain't got a plan for it, right?
right,
Correct, but
That's-
what I'm saying is, 500 years, 100 years, where have we had any damage in town? Severe. I
I
know,
don't know the answer to that.
I don't know the answer to that either if there's been specific properties that have used the national flood insurance more than others, or received more, had to utilize it more, out of damages from flooding, I don't know.
And then there are programs that the town has participated in, at least a program, like the Municipal Vulnerability Preparedness Program that has assessed, I believe, like where some of the potential for, well, for vulnerability related to climate and in Reading is increased water, where that would be and how that might be mitigated. I don't remember all the details of that program, but that is something the town has participated in. It's a grant program from the state. So that's, and there are some pathways to get a handle on where are the greatest vulnerabilities in town and what are some avenues for addressing those. And that program was like done, public involvement, closed. There's, I think, a plan now. Yeah.
I mean, because, you know, the Abidjone does flow through, you know, Willow Street into, all the way into, you know, Woburn, et cetera. And there's a lot of timber that's fallen over the years and so forth. They haven't been on in years. And there was a time when, you know, maybe the stream has flood, you know, the banks got a little bit more water and so forth and so on. But
Yeah.
for the most part, you know, I think it's pretty well maintained. You know, I mean, I don't think there's anyone that's got water on my street that I know of. And that's a good thing. So I'll have to look at the map to be
Yeah.
clearer. But
Yeah,
I think going forward, like John said about the town meeting, you know, with all said and done, we're kind of handcuffed in a sense of the word that we do have to go with the bylaws. But what are we gonna get for the town? You know, and I think that's our main concern going forward. I mean, we have to change because the federal government tells us we have to change. Where do
Well,
we stop?
And I'm not going to go down this rabbit hole, but I will say that flooding is flooding and flooding vulnerability and flooding risk is a problem across the state, both coastal and inland flooding.
Right.
And there are pathways and ideas of not just within the city, but at the state level, some of which are being implemented, some of which are just ideas and not being implemented yet. So kind of like to all of that, yes, that's a good question.
Sure.
And there's not a perfect suite of answers yet. How did I do?
Yeah, you did great.
I don't want to cut Andrew off, but there are things that he
It's not
wants to
so
share
much
that I
of
don't know
an
about.
argument, but I'm saying, like, we're rushing into April, has to be done by July. Why?
Oh,
right now the carrot is right, that if there's damage from flood and you're in the National Flood Insurance Program, you'll get some insurance money back for that, right? And so that's insurances. I don't know what their maximum allowance is or if they're increasing or other in terms of it, but that's the carrot right now.
yeah, and just to even put a finer point on that, the why, and CPDC discussed this, I think it was back in January. We thought, oh, well, sometimes we often go to town meeting with bylaw updates in November. But the new flood insurance maps go into place July 8th, 2025.
Yep.
And God forbid, knock on wood, anything were to happen between July and November, anybody who was part of the National Flood Insurance Program, they would not be eligible during that time frame. So that's why it feels like a little bit of a fast track, as we wanted to bring it to April town meeting so that people are secure by July.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
To your earlier point, you mentioned that culvert maintenance is difficult to, but if there is like a culvert or stream channel that you want to look at or have us look at, just shoot us an email and with conservation, DPW, highway or other, we can try to get some eyes on it and see what's possible to do in terms of cleaning out the culvert to help the water flow through better. We're happy to try to pull out as much as we can if the time can be allotted for it, so.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
So in terms of definitions, section 10.1.3, there's a few removals and additions to definitions. So we're simply gonna remove the area of special flood hazard because that's really getting back to the designations which are further defined. Development, I think at the last CPDC meeting, because per the model bylaw, they added this last clause of or storage of equipment or materials. We can define storage if you wish. It didn't feel necessary through DCR from our latest correspondence with them, in that if it's a shed for storage, that will be counted as like new development. And if it's exterior storage, that's exterior storage. So I don't think we need to define storage, but it did come up at the last CPDC meeting. So we wanted to try to give
Andrew, this is, sorry, John.
this is not flood storage, this is
This is simply a definition.
storage.
Okay, not to be confused with like an LID or something.
Right. Right, this is just general storage of landscape materials.
I'm sorry, could I just, you just used an acronym.
LID?
Yeah, so just think of like one of those swales where you're
Okay.
storing mass amounts of water, right? It's
Yeah.
It's not to be confused with some type of equipment for like Caltech system
Mhm.
that deals with stormwater management. They're
Oh, it could be
saying,
good
so-
for-
This is the
I see.
storage of
Because-
things above
because it says
ground,
equipment
not
or
storage
materials.
below.
Yeah,
just
a pile of dirt, some wood, what does that mean?
Exactly.
I-
I think you're gonna get into trouble with this. I
Yeah.
really do.
Yeah.
Just a quick question, so does that include somebody who may have a lot that they put vehicles on?
You're into that.
That's.
the equipment.
As
Because now you're telling
defined
somebody they
yes.
can't
Right.
use their land again.
Lot of
For that.
restrictions.
That's a restriction and, just as a citizen, I don't happen to have that.
Right.
But that's putting a restriction on someone's use of their land. If a shed is considered storage and not development now on someone's, sheds are sheds, right? You have to get a permit, but
The
They're
trouble
really
with,
not.
the trouble with storage is it's not bound. It's how many seconds is it there?
Right.
Is it 2 weeks?
Well-
What kind of material?
And I guess I have two questions. One, is this required or is this an add-on?
That's the next question.
And
We-
B, storage, this is potentially, outdoor storage, which is different from a shed, because a shed would be included in the structure language.
Just quick comment, I'm a town meeting member as well.
Mhm.
I would ask to have this removed during the meeting.
Andrew, is this from the state?
This is from the
Is this
state.
from the state?
Yeah.
Oh, so
Andrew, why don't you go to the state and ask them whether they have a definition for it?
They do not.
Yeah.
I
They
did
do
ask
not.
that.
They don't have a definition.
They did not define storage.
And
of
that's a
equipment or
request from the
materials.
state, that's not a.
Right, they consider it defined as development right here. But-
So would you ask the state this? And if not, could we clarify even further? Does this include outdoor storage of equipment or only indoor storage of equipment or materials?
What I could determine, they were speaking about both. Again, indoor is that structural language,
And or.
I suggest that maybe you can ask the state this, that what they're getting at is if you store anything in a floodplain area, you're taking up space.
That doesn't say this, Tom. This says development. This is defining development, not floodplain. This is defining the word development. And I objected on principle that every other example up there is an act. Is a conscious deliberate act, and you can see it. Dredging, yep. Drilling, yep. Mining, yep. I don't know what storage means. How much is storage? How long is storage? What is storage? You're just begging for a fight.
mhm.
Just to go back to the state. Just say there's problems with that word.
Yeah, well,
If you
I
can
will-
regulate it, you can regulate it as a zoning issue. You don't need to regulate it here.
Mhm. I will at this point propose to remove it. Let's see what their comments are.
just one thing, with this is not gonna impact somebody being able to put in insurance or do insurance, if they've got a car or a truck, I'm thinking, in my head, the state is thinking somebody's got a bunch of trucks there that they park for construction vehicles or something like that. And they don't want them in that area.
Yeah, or does
That's-
this mean like
that's
a
what they're
car
doing.
in a driveway?
Yeah, does a car in a driveway count? And, that kind of came up actually during a permitting question of somebody who was along a waterway where they currently don't have a garage and they're putting in a garage. And one of the points I brought up was, now you've got a car that may leak oil, but it's gonna leak oil in the garage and be contained.
Right.
So
Even just,
Well,
even just a log splitter and a pile
a
of
log
logs.
splitter and a pile of logs, cobblestones, or
So-
anything.
So these are all really, I find these all to be really good points. Andrew, is there more room for discussion or clarification with DCR on this?
Yeah,
Okay,
yep.
I'd say we try to clarify as much as
I'll keep
possible.
asking, because my assumption actually is storage of like commercial equipment or landscape materials
Doesn't
or
say
other,
that.
but it doesn't say that, yeah, so which is a definition and use we have in our table, so if we can try to refer back to one of our existing uses.
That's what I'm thinking, because we have an outdoor storage definition
We have
somewhere
that
in our
as well,
bylaw, and
yeah.
if we can tie it exactly to that.
Mhm.
And maybe, I mean, I know that there may be limits on how we can do this,
Mhm.
but if we can reiterate that in our definition and separate it from development, but still include it, then that might make it clearer for people if a DCR is amenable. And DCR, everybody, is the Department of Conservation Recreation.
You answered my question, thank you.
I'll try to be the acronym police.
The old NDC.
Well, and it goes
They
back, it
combined
goes
a few-
back,
they
it goes
combined a
back.
I will push further on
One
that.
question, you did mention, why isn't, like the conservation here tonight?
I believe conservation is on the Zoom,
they are.
but because it's a zoning regulation, we, for sure.
Question.
Yeah.
Okay, we're gonna get through this, you all. Let's keep moving.
The flood hazard boundary map, again referencing back to our newly appointed flood federal insurance administrator, which would be our building commissioner. Minor adjustments to the floodway definition, and here's where we then get into some new uses, or new definitions, I should say. So per the model bylaw, they'd like to define a functionally dependent use, which is a use that cannot achieve its intended purpose unless it's located or carried out in close proximity to water. This includes like docking and ports, things that, right, probably more relevant to coastal communities, I would say, but they've asked to include it anyways, for the model, so we referenced it here, but I don't think it's referenced much again, the rest of the bylaw.
Right, we don't have these types of facilities. In
Right.
Reading, it's a perfect example, but for it to be compliant, we have to include this language.
Highest adjacent grade is a definition being added to identify the highest elevation of the ground, prior to construction and next to the proposed walls of the structure as they define it. So wherever your building is going, the area adjacent to it, what's the highest grade, so that they can determine for the floodplain. And I'm sure drainage.
Natural existence.
Yeah, so if you were doing tiered landscaping, if you put in a wall in the tiered landscaping, and you know, it might have been okay with conservation, but now you're in,
This isn't saying you can't be restricted from that. I think it's just saying that you have to identify it and then probably a proposed adjacent grade.
Right, it's just a definition of highest adjacent grade, which is presumably referred to as a term that's referred to later on. So everybody has clarity on what grade that means.
They asked that we define historic structure, which meets the general definitions from the local level all the way up to the national level. Again, I don't know, and I'm sure there are, but I don't know what degree of historic structures are located in floodplain, if any, or if they're adjacent to floodplain or parcel pieces within floodplain, but they've asked to define it. Again, I don't think it's referenced much else in the bylaw. They've asked for some amendments to the definition of new construction. which is really just getting at, again, a new structure or new improvement to a lot. Which could be an addition, counts as new construction, a tear down rebuild could be new construction, just a new site development could be new construction.
I have a question here.
Mhm.
At the risk of oversimplifying things. It's defined as the first management code, regulation, ordinance, or standard adopted by our community.
Mhm.
Do we just have a date for Reading when the first type of thing was adopted?
That is a good question.
Like a
I know
year?
it was
Like, would
around
that just be-
1970.
And
don't
please,
know.
others on CPDC disagree with me if I'm going down a dangerous path, but it just seems for interpretation for anybody who's looking at this. If we could include the date for Reading, that might be useful.
Yeah, I can find that out. I believe we adopted floodplain around 1970, but I'll try to find the exact date.
New construction said any structure built after 1970.
But that's what I'm also trying to read. It's like,
That doesn't make sense.
how does that make sense, right?
When they go to reference new construction.
But that's what this is saying.
No, I agree with you.
Right.
That's why it doesn't make sense.
Oh, I
It
can't. say
doesn't.
that.
We have to see how it's used. We have to keep reading, guys.
Right.
They are asking us to define RV, recreational vehicle. Simply, I suppose that those looking to park their RVs within floodplain, later in the bylaw, but again, that one is not a local proposed addition.
Right, this is a required one.
So that is required?
Yeah, I remember,
Because
I remember we talked about this at
Mhm.
CPDC 3 years ago. We were like, why is that in there? We don't have
How do
this.
we enforce it? How do
I have a
you-
we have a neighbor down the street who had an RV park next to the house. They're definitely getting the 100-year claim. And that's gonna be a problem for somebody to use their property.
Well, this doesn't necessarily say they can't be in the floodplain. There are just rules about what you have to be
It's
able
just
to do. It
defining
has to be like
They're
language
defining
or
what it
something
is.
like
This is
that.
the
Yeah.
dictionary.
This
Later on, we'll
is, these
figure
are
out
the
what they're gonna do.
definitions.
Okay,
What's done with all these definitions are later on in the bylaw, yeah.
so on that note, I'm gonna
Thank
appreciate
you.
your time.
But this is fun.
Oh, it is fun. It is fun. Maybe I'll think about joining. Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a great night. I appreciate it.
Exactly.
Again, defining start of construction, date of issuance of permit. And the start and the placement of the permanent construction beginning. Structure being defined as walled roofed building, and really just getting rid of insurance references, because that's not the intent of the bylaws, to give insurance advice or definitions.
Neither should we.
Substantial repair of a foundation was a new definition to add per the model bylaw. Really, again, in the light that the foundation itself needs, I guess, repair or replacement, and could be within the floodplain, below, at grade, or above.
So the definition above measures it in percent of market value. This definition, which is also substantial, abandons that and says it's the fraction of the perimeter. If I
Mhm.
barge new concrete on my brick foundation, I do the entire foundation, I've touched 100% of it. It's only cost me $1,000.
Mhm.
Does it apply or doesn't it apply? The reason to be knit about this is this stuff will happen.
Mhm.
People will come in and well-meaning volunteers will read this and says, but it says 50%, we have to do what it says. Now's the time to kind of engineer this so the language doesn't hang us up unnecessarily. Would you be content to specify that as a percent of cost? Or
Do we have flexibility there?
Question I will ask.
I mean, if I paint it, the entire foundation, I've touched it all. Have I triggered this?
I don't think
It doesn't, it says to repair or replace, and granted repair isn't defined, but maintain
there you
is
go.
probably
If
not
I put
repair.
a parge coating on another,
Right.
my stucco is falling
Yeah.
out. Or I repoint everything because it's falling apart.
Seems like it would be to the
Chimney.
discretion of the building commissioner, but.
Well, yeah, this specifically says the foundation.
Foundation, okay.
If you have a cinder block. you
Yeah, this is
repoint
just the
or
foundation.
You waterproof it. Hey, there's one. You want to water.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
On the zone A, the A 130, is it these ads or these existing ones?
These are existing zones across all of floodplain, but we just have locally so far zone A, zone X, and I think some AE
Okay,
as
so
well.
just,
We don't know how.
Just defined, right?
We really have to see how these are getting.
Yeah.
Are you noting the ones that we have to like really pay close attention to? Andrew? Okay. We're on like
so-
5 now, so.
So you guys, right, it's vanilla because Reading isn't Situate. You know what
right,
I'm saying? So we have to, I agree with John, because you have to, we have to be a little more in front of it, and more specific to the needs of what's gonna happen in the floods, or for Reading.
right.
And I don't, that's why I said, do we have to rush into it? And I understand now. Yes,
You just, yeah, I feel, I would feel really, really bad if we were slow and somebody was
that's
impacted.
what I asked earlier, how many zones are really affected by it? How many, dwellings are affected by it?
Do we send the hyperlink out for FEMA that folks could actually answer these questions for themselves? It seems like a lost opportunity.
I didn't put it on the legal notice, but we have it on the website and we've shared it with every email. asked them.
You know how you communicate. Tell
Yeah.
people what you're gonna tell them, tell them what you told them.
Mhm.
You gotta do it over and over.
The issue is, this is a propensity thing, right?
Yeah.
How often does it happen? Once.
Well, this is, I would have just made sure it was front and center. Go look up your address.
Yeah.
yeah, but just real quick, a scope, you're probably looking about $2,100 at a minimum per flood insurance. And it says 800, but when you start looking at Massachusetts and the value of your home, baseline is about 2,000. And depending on the value of your home, it could become more significant.
So
But again, I just draw.
these are important points. Two things, I really want to keep us moving, and B, I really don't want this board to be giving insurance advice. I think it was a good point to, maybe on the webpage, say, here's where you go, for information about insurance.
Just getting back to substantial repair, I'm gonna run that one by the building commissioner too, if it's a definition that he would, I guess, in the future define what work is
If you
qualifying.
just submitted it to replacement,
Right.
then you got it.
Right.
If it was, it's gone, replacing it, then it's objective.
Yeah. Variance defined, relief from a community from the terms of a floodplain management regulation, whether that's in dimensional controls or anywhere below, as we move forward, but defining variance. Violation was defined so that the enforcement of any violations that are to come, the state could act on, or the town locally could act on. In section 10.14 is where we start to get to the regulations around floodplain. We wanted to make sure that all review processes were captured. This is where we get into variances as well. Some of the changes in addition start to be shown. So the first paragraph here is getting at the state variances towards relief from the floodplain requirements. And then the second paragraph is towards the local regulations from floodplain. So it's two different processes and two different levels of variance. But if the requirements are within the building code and you want to waive a variance from that, you go into the state. If you want a variance from, say, section 10(1)(6) for a certain use, that will be locally and could also get to the state as well. So it's local regs in terms of how they're defined and enforced to a degree. But it's two different variances dependent on the proposal, so.
If I'm reading this, if you put a basement in a flood zone, is that how I'm reading that? In the bottom part, it says structure below base level flood will result in increased premium rates of flood insurance up to 25 to 100. Such construction below base level flood level increase the risk to life and property. So how does, if you have something below grade, such as a foundation, is that what this is defining? That's why I'm asking, and this is, you're saying this is a must-have?
So
In
this
there?
language is a must-have, and this is,
Can Reading then say, the town of Reading can say, well, who requests can we say, no, that's okay for Reading? If I have a basement in the floodplain, that's okay. I think that's, to me,
This is insurance
Yeah.
advice. Why are we issuing insurance advice?
what, it says, right, it says the bylaw, right?
We just got done saying we.
that is, and that's.
I'm saying the people on this board tonight are not gonna be giving insurance
No, right,
advice.
I'm just reading that as a below grade.
But that's why, like, the question I pose, why would the town issue these letters that state such a things when, like, this is a variance from the state level in the state building code, right, and
Well, it's a CYA thing, but
it is, that's what they,
It's
yeah.
exactly what it is.
But you could write a note that didn't specify numbers, because those numbers will be wrong in a year.
Right.
So, again, I think I go back.
it's saying $25, the insurance is costing $25 for every $100 of coverage.
25%.
Right.
But you're issuing advice, you're issuing counsel. I'd much rather it says you will be subject to a readjustment by whoever's issuing the policy, and leave it at that. Just be aware you may be or you will be.
I tend to agree. And I can also see in your comments up there that you may have been going back and forth with the state around this, but yeah, I concur with putting an amount there.
Mhm.
I don't know if this is exactly what's required in the state
they-
bylaw,
yeah, they-
but that's,
Hope we get a commission on this.
yeah.
We're
just-
selling insurance.
I can very much see the point of notice to the person who's seeking the variance that, it is, that this is going to increase your premium if we give you this variance, the town is not on the hook for that. But it seems like there may be some details to be worked out, and Andrew, if you're going back to DCR, it might be
And
great to bring up this point.
Andrew, this is specific to the national insurance flood policy.
That was
That's
my
why.
understanding, yeah,
That's why.
yeah.
Yeah.
Then you can give us a form letter that you wrote, Mr. State Government, and we'll issue. And then we
It
can stand you a
should
document.
read that structures below may result in increased
Maybe,
premiums
that's how I feel,
from the
right.
national home insurance flood policy, and that's how it should
I
read.
agree.
Yeah, it should be may, and it should specify national flood
Well,
insurance,
if
because
you-
people get private flood
But
insurance.
if you have a,
too, right?
Right.
the town can write you a variance, if I had a basement from Reading, if I had a basement, now I'm in a floodplain, and I had a basement, Reading could say, here's a variance, I don't have to pay. Right?
We're
That's
not
the-
gonna collect the
Ready-
money anyway.
No, no.
Reading could say,
Reading-
Reading could say.
No, that's not what
great.
it's saying.
Well, that's what I'm reading in the town
No,
of
but-
Reading will request the
It's-
state forward to.
It's
appeal
saying
written-
you wanna go put a foundation
Well,
into a
What do
floodplain.
What do you mean? This is, if you're building, this doesn't say anything about building. This doesn't say anything at all about building.
This is saying if you want to vary from the state building code allowances to your own discretion,
Correct.
well, I
Is
know if
it-
it's your own discretion, the state building code appeals board has to approve it, most likely, I don't know what their justification
I
is.
suppose you had a reason for the variance, which
Right.
maybe you were building or maybe you were. renovating.
Okay. but
This is saying you're requesting a variance, town might say, have at it, you should know your insurance premium is likely to increase,
If they
not
want
our
us-
fault.
If they want us to notice taxpayers, then ask them for a form letter.
Yeah, that's
And then all we're doing is
Yeah.
providing advice to
about,
state.
yep, template and standard, yep.
Is that workable advice? We've
Yeah.
just threw a ton at
Yep.
you. I-
That's, town meeting, that's gonna be a tough one to get through.
Well, if we had answers
You're
before
like the
town
town
meeting, is that
meeting
likely?
trial run
Yeah,
here. This is good.
Yeah, I'm gonna, what is it?
We're getting a D so far.
I think
Yeah,
in
we're
some
building
cases,
it.
only where it applies if the basement is below the flood line. Because you can't get any insurance for basements.
This is only for
But on the construction side, some of the towns will have it. Yeah, you're building in a floodplain. The basement is there, but you can't use the basement. Maybe for electrical or something like that, but you can't set up a couch there or a bedroom or anything like that. So
And
I
everybody.
should add, I do have flood insurance, but it's not in Massachusetts.
Smart.
Been around the block before on that, okay.
Let's keep going.
Right,
Is that workable
I mean,
advice?
yeah,
or
I'll see what I
request?
can do to work that one up in a more neatly fashion.
Have other communities already adopted this?
There are a few, North Reading, Wilmington and other, I don't think they've adopted it just yet, but they're bringing forward basically a copy paste of the model bylaw.
For their
We're ready,
town
we do
meetings.
these.
They actually read it?
Yeah. It'll find it correct.
Lot of jargon, a lot of technicalities in this one. Okay, just reading the second paragraph, make sure nothing else. So this is,
Voting machines over there, sorry.
this is actually some.
Tabulating.
Sorry, Andrew.
That's okay. This is actually some form of criteria in terms of a variance from the local floodplain regs being good and sufficient cause that and non-financial hardship, variance. So it's interesting that they set their own also criteria for variance different from the other original.
These are the criteria we have to apply, so local,
Right.
and that last one's gonna be fun, minimum necessary.
Yeah, and moving forward, designation of floodplain administrator, and Reading, that will be the building commissioner. Uses and permits within the floodplain overlay, so here we go. Per the model bylaw, the town will require a permit for all proposed construction or development in the floodplain overlay district. Placement of manufactured homes, say they're developed off-site, placed on-site. Placement of agricultural facilities, fences, sheds, storage facilities, drilling, mining, paving, other that might increase flooding or adversely impact flood risk to other properties shall receive a permit.
So that leads us to back why they put storage of equipment. They don't want you damming up the floodplain.
Right.
That's right.
I think that's what that's getting at, and
Or if you have like a pile of gravel back there or something like that, right?
for this one, they do have a model permit, I believe, because a building permit is not necessary for all of these things. So they have a model permit that we can apply to our online permitting system or other, I guess, in the end, though, it's an act of good faith because a fence doesn't require a building permit. Someone puts up a fence. How am I gonna know?
I saw that note in there and I don't want to belabor it. I do have to, I have I have maybe two questions. But one question is this verbatim from the model bylaw? So this is absolutely what we have to include. And then I'm also just kind of noting, this isn't a question, that they're in the two sections before, there is the opportunity to get a variance. So somebody could get a variance and allow these if they meet these criteria.
And it's might increase, so it's obviously not gonna, okay.
Well, construction requires. So this is where we get into uses permitted as of right in the floodplain. Again, the black language is existing allowances in terms of the municipal recreation, drainage, control, orchard, nurseries, and agricultural for the most part.
Andrew, one second.
Yep.
I just gotta get back to this. Who's approving or not approving these permits?
It will be the building.
The building
commissioner.
commissioner
So
is.
what training is he getting on what may or may not be an adverse?
They are, the building commissioner is going to floodplain trainings and receiving
Okay.
certification.
Okay.
Yep.
Go on.
Good question, though.
What a wreck. Okay.
So in this section of by right uses, we're not taking away any by right uses. What we are doing is clarifying that if there's and this is again per the model bylaw, that if there's a residential subdivision within the floodplain overlay district, or by how I interpret that, somewhat near and adjacent to the floodplain overlay district, that subdivision will minimize flood damage and adequate drainage design is provided, which is fairly typical of our normal subdivision standards anyways.
And Andrew, to go back to a comment I made before on that shooting range. It's-
Yeah.
I read that as really, it's has to have been in existence,
Yeah, established range.
established range. Now, do we have one? Because I just saw a pistol and gun club, or something like that.
We have
ready.
one, yeah.
We do have one, I
Maybe
don't believe they're in the floodplain, although probably should double check. that.
They might be,
They have-
because they're back there
they're
by.
by some wetlands.
Yeah, they're.
That's a huge piece of land.
Right rifle.
Mhm.
Needs to be.
Cape Verde's too.
So this is where the regulation for that recreational vehicle definition, we had seen earlier, gets implemented. So all RVs to be placed on a site must be elevated and anchored in accordance with the zone's regulations, that being the floodplain zone regulations, the code for foundation and elevation requirements, or be on the site for less than 180 days.
Or before
Or
lights is highway ready.
Right,
Which is a
so,
weird or.
so this is really speaking, so it's like if you're parking it there because you take it out in the summertime, it's licensed and highway ready.
Yeah, so it's fine.
Like
So
you
you
can,
can't
like you
use
can drive it away if
Mhm,
there's.
right,
flood
if there's-
coming.
You can't be storing a bunch of RVs that don't have plates on them.
Yeah.
In the floodplain.
Right.
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 I guess that's not so bad. I think any of us want that.
Moving forward, again, uses permitted by special permit in the floodplain. Let's see, those commercial golf courses, the uses described already. No changes or additions there. We just added a quick sentence, end of sentence clause that it is in fact a special permit by the Board of Appeals. Remove, so yeah, this removal here is getting towards a LOMA and or variance, and really is not necessary, I guess, in terms of special permit process, so that's why it's proposed for removal here. I can get rid of the- Sorry. Just trying to get rid of the cross, if I could help it.
You see that next section, 162 is in regards to a Loma?
That's, yeah. Situations like these, a letter of map amendment.
Letter of map amendment is long.
So I
But
think what's
that's what's
happening
coming
here
out.
is the existing section 10.16 is not the special permit clause. Special permits being moved up because of the removal, and this is, yeah, again, any land if as being proven to be in fact neither subject to flooding, topographic conditions, drainage and such, may receive approvals, and that's really getting at the process to say I'm not in a floodplain area, which is a LOMA or variance.
And where did they move up to, you said?
It's actually being removed.
So they can no longer?
No, they still can, but it's
Not
through
in
the LOMA process, not the local
It has nothing to do,
regulations.
yeah, because you wouldn't do it anyways.
Right.
Yeah, correct. Okay, that makes
Can you
sense.
reference that? I mean, if you're a layman, right, that's, you mentioned, I never had heard that term.
Yep.
Mhm.
So essentially, you're filing to amend the map saying that, you're saying, hey, Mr. Engineer, you're an expert in this, come here, look at this, I don't think this is actually,
Correct.
this is an elevation that shouldn't be in a floodplain. They come do a study, they submit it to the state.
Right.
I don't think it belongs in the bylaw. But if there's the bandwidth to do it, it may be again useful to put on the webpage
Okay,
about
so
this, so that
website.
July hits. Like where residents can go to have the map as it affects their property reviewed.
Let me see if we can add some tools and resources.
I'm just
Yeah.
thinking that as, you know, this year in particular, as long as you've got the
Mhm.
webpage, so we may as well put some tools and resources up there.
One quick question, how many years do they change these bylaws? I mean, when's the last time they changed the
What was
bylaws?
the previous date on there?
74?
The maps, I don't think were dated, it was quite a while ago, but the last,
74?
About every 10.
I thought
About
the
every
maps
10
are-
years.
About every
Maps
10
get
years you
reviewed
do all
about
the-
every 10 years.
yeah. So we've seen 1970, 80s, late 90s and 2010 bylaw amendments to floodplain. I don't have the
10 to 15 years.
specifics of them, but 10 to
Does-
15 years, yeah.
There was a bylaw committee, there is a bylaw
There
committee
is, yeah.
in place right now. And they take all the recommendations that come in. And they weigh on them as well.
Yeah.
But you put your committee's bylaws forward and then again, it goes to the town to vote. So it's a complicated process.
I'm not sure it's coming. Let's move on.
So uses prohibited, again, not adding any new restrictions towards existing prohibited uses. This was a local ad, so we could include this or not, but we were thinking that generally when you're prohibiting uses, you would ensure that uses that aren't described by right or by special permit, you'd, in a lot of cases, you would say if it's not defined or described, it's not allowed. And
I wouldn't add
I don't,
anything.
I was thinking after the earlier discussion, we might not wanna add that just yet in terms of like, what does that mean to like a residential addition or something of the nature?
Exactly, that's,
Yeah.
you know, so you're adding on top of something that already
Right,
is
which is like
restricted.
our uses by right don't necessarily get into residential additions or other, it's just a general flat use, and so I don't want, I guess, to
Tax.
overly restrict what could be done in floodplain, that is currently allowed still, so.
I think that's fine.
It's a pretty minor, I mean. You put a driveway in, put utility trench to areas, power. Landscaping, this seemed to be pretty modest. Nobody's gonna confuse that for putting a new foundation.
Now, the flood zone doesn't correspond with conservation or they run parallel?
So conservation does review it if it's a proposal within the 100-year floodplain. A lot of our floodplain just happens to overlap with wetlands as well.
Correct.
So it's coincident, not
Yeah.
necessarily by the letter of the law.
There's wetlands and land that can be wet.
Yeah.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Every so often.
Conditions for approval for uses permitted in the floodplain, really being simplified,
Because those are in the definitions
I was
above,
gonna say
right?
that was in the definitions above,
So it's a conflict if you have it restated down here.
right. For new construction or substantial improvements of existing structures, for the model bylaw there. They actually had less, of these following conditions, which are fairly boilerplate in nature, I believe, I think the reason for a little bit less is that we just don't have a lot of like commercial development allowances in the floodplain, so we don't have as many conditions tied to the development, so. If we were to look at like new development standards, this is where locally we would put your compensatory storage conditions, like a 2-to-1 or 1.5-to-1 or other, but.
Commercial only, correct?
Yes.
it could be either or, but
It's requiring, like, if you were to disturb some amount of floodplain, in return, you have to create storage for whatever you offset.
right.
And it's usually to a ratio of like, if it's, for instance, if I disturb 500 square feet of floodplain, I've got to recreate. It's usually wetland in that case, but it's, I may have to create like a 2-to-1 ratio. I have to create 1,000 square feet of wetland.
Well, this is for new development. Right, because again, if
Yes.
you're doing in addition,
Right now, we don't actually have that standard, but the town could consider locally in the future if you wanted.
I think those, when they go through zoning,
Yeah,
like you guys do pretty solid.
we're pretty stringent on our stormwater.
And I think like every project needs its own solution.
Mhm.
Everything has a different parameter to it to work with, and so.
yeah, stormwater drainage on a residential project could be,
Oh, it's
Showstopper.
happening every day now.
it's like.
It's almost required.
And on,
And to that point of,
I can't remember the last time we didn't do it.
Really?
Even where it's not required. I just did it on mine, I'm not required to do it. Just looking out for my neighbors. So,
I have an overall question.
Yep.
At the risk of going down a rabbit hole, so the two conditions that are being removed have to do with requiring that portions below grade are watertight, withstand the effects of flooding. And then we have another item that was 9 is now 7, saying where watertight floodproofing of a structure is permitted. Do we have anywhere where watertight floodproofing is permitted? Is that I'm wondering now what that number 7 is referring to for removing the 2 clauses that are about waterproofing.
It's a drain. Sorry, where watertight flood.
Because I know there's ways that you can mitigate the flood impacts by not having it be watertight,
Right.
like where they have breakaway
Right.
walls and windows.
So I guess I'm wondering, where is watertight floodproofing permitted? Like I can see the
Right.
reasons for those other things because
Right.
sometimes it's better to let the water flow.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm wondering what 7 is referring to now. And I guess, and then I'm wondering, like, if CPDC is or whatever, or the building
It's
commissioner.
gonna be in the building code.
that's what I was gonna say.
Okay,
It's-
yeah,
It's gonna be
like
in the
where,
building, yeah.
like what's driving where is it
Yeah.
permitted?
Yeah, so, because the header reference is new construction or substantial improvement, so automatically going to the building code.
Mhm. And so I guess I'm wondering, where is it permitted with all of this? But maybe in the
Which I
building.
think is gonna come down to like what's allowed in the certain designations of floodplain.
You may be in an aquifer protection district where you wouldn't be allowed to do something like that if you wanted to.
And that's in the building code, so outside of what we're writing here.
It's just allows it if it's permitted.
If it's
If
permitted,
it's permitted, say in zone A, now this condition.
I guess that's what I'm wondering is, are we permitting it anywhere? But I'd like to just check on that.
Yeah.
Right, or, well, I think even if we aren't permitting it today, it might be permitted
Later.
in another section,
Yeah.
yeah.
I think it kind of gets back to something like a residential addition, right? It's not exactly clear that that's prohibited nor allowed, but if it were to happen, you might be looking at weatherproofing or some sort of drainage design around it, so.
Okay,
So I can see what further info.
Does the word permitted in that sentence mean allowed, or does it mean credential issued by the town to allow you to proceed?
Permitted, as I interpret this sentence, is regulation of a zone, permitted in like a
Okay.
floodplain
It's
zone.
not that it would require a separate.
Right, right.
yeah, so if you could check on that, because I haven't seen anywhere in here where we are saying it is actually permitted.
Right. Yep. So as we get to section 10.1.8 here, this is where we start to see the new references to some of the floodplain regulations in terms of the firm. The submittal requirements for applications within such. As we continue, it's mostly reporting and disclaimers below, so.
There's the disclaimer that we're not giving insurance advice.
Yeah, it's 10.1.1.3.
So that's the majority of the changes. Right now I have on my list, at least for us to look further into, providing the firm and the FIS to town meeting members and really the general public too for awareness. Continue to review and question that use of storage in the development definition, and if we can further define that or tie back to one or any of our existing definitions.
Or eliminate.
Yeah.
If you eliminate it, why don't you have like the wetland or conservation? You know, as you said, they weren't changing any of their limits. So.
Yep. Good point. We have on the list highest grade and how that's in terms of existing grade used for proposals. New construction, if we can find the exact date or word that in somehow of when the town originally adopted floodplain, and if that's applicable. We have substantial repair to a foundation definition, if the 50% clause can be revisited either towards cost or simplified.
Or we can only replace.
Yep.
Replace.
In the new construction one, let's just make sure that that's what they're actually trying to say.
Yeah,
To begin with.
And
They're not trying to say
storage.
from the adoption of these amendments.
Right, I mean, that's also what I'm thinking, like almost
They may have
any
just missed on
permit
that.
from here on out is simply
Yeah.
these.
So that's usually how it goes.
Right.
You don't want to catch
How
anything in
can-
flight right now, is that what you're worried about?
Well, not so much in flight. I'm talking about like, how do you go back to the 1970s and establish that as new construction?
Right, and say that you now have to do flood storage for house built.
Correct.
Right,
That's the point.
It is a really weird
It's written
phraseology there.
Oddly,
It is, yeah, let me,
so either rewrite it all together or just.
Yeah, because when I first read it, I read it as like new construction from this regulation instead of.
I think that's what it,
my general.
maybe that's what they meant. Or
Yeah.
maybe we're just missing the mark.
So that's what I thought would be normally meant, but the way I read
The
it
way
was new construction
I can
as this
see.
tricky
Yeah,
definition going
from-
back to,
This.
which is why we need to check it out.
Yeah.
Okay, what else do you have,
Yep,
Andrew?
Good course, we'll see if there's any tools and resources we can share for the letter map amendment process. And we'll look at that condition 7 in terms of, was it watertight design and how that relates to the code or allowances of our local regs.
Okay,
That FIS flood insurance study,
Flood
the
insurance.
Middlesex County
Thank you.
that you referenced. John, I think that's to be very important for everybody to, and I would encourage community members to take a look at the report, because I think that may indicate how often our neighbors are incurring these types of maybe it's that detailed that it has, I'm sure it might,
Mhm.
You know, like adjacent towns, how badly they're getting.
or just us in general, like how many of these occurrences do we actually see here?
Right, it might.
How-
go by
how-
county
how
or
relevant is it?
I don't know.
Yeah, sometimes, well, how's flood fine in your insurance?
Well, this-
You get a water leak
That's
inside
what
your
the
home.
study is.
They based these new maps off of the study, is what this is, I'm getting at.
Well,
So you should
is it-
familiarize yourself with the study.
Okay.
Neither is water coming off your roof.
Okay. Right. I did not know that.
So in general, how, I'm gonna say this here, like, what do we need, like, the federal government, what do they need? Over 50% of the vote for town meeting, do they need, so,
Oh, what do we need as a town to pass this
Yeah.
at town meeting?
It's actually a 2/3. vote.
Thirds,
Bylaws
all
change.
zoning bylaws are 2/3 of town meeting.
okay,
What's the consequence if it doesn't pass?
thank you, John.
Some of our homeowners may be left high and dry
No.
if they get really wet.
If,
That's a serious question.
well, if,
I am being serious. That is the repercussion, is that we leave some of our, right, that we leave some of our homeowners who might be dependent on the National Flood Insurance Program. If we don't pass this, they may not be eligible. I don't know if it's they may not or they won't be
Seems
eligible.
like we want to get an answer to that question. Is it may, or is it simply
You buy
advisory?
private insurance, but you won't be able to, necessarily be eligible.
It might just be advisory in your.
Because the word national doesn't seem to to me, have to do anything with the local bylaw. You know, just relatively
I
speaking.
would just caution that you don't.
I don't know that.
You don't know if your private insurance provider is putting you through a national program.
Exactly.
Right,
So, right, so that's the thing, again, a lot of the local may work through NFIP or be on their own, and
And
so
do-
you don't.
Not to say insurance again, and I apologize, but what if what kind of protection does a homeowner have for the town of Reading if they drop the insurer? We don't know that.
the town of Reading doesn't protect.
We don't know.
No.
No, we don't.
We're,
Ask your question again.
well, so we're saying, okay, we're gonna vote for the bylaws
Right.
because, you know, they're there. And we go through the national insurance. And so our primary insurance is we're gonna drop it. What kind of protection does the?
So this has nothing to do with the town's insurance. This brings the town in compliance with FEMA's latest flood map.
Correct.
Because of that,
Right.
in theory, your insurance company is already doing the same thing. They should notify you if your property, which you're paying homeowners on, suddenly becomes part of a floodplain. They may not. So this is advisory. It's belt and suspenders that you have an opportunity to independently learn, and it brings the town in compliance. Your insurance and my insurance would be the ones we'd have to check if we're in a floodplain, and then we'd have to go out and pay for the extra.
But they're changing. So,
The definition is changing, right? So if you are today,
right,
wise of you to check that you're still in tomorrow or not, and if you're not in today, wise to check if you are now jammed into a floodplain. I just checked. So some of Reading right below it, but most of it is not. The golf course is not, the school's not.
Yep, and just to clarify, per DCR, communities participating in the National Flood Insurance Program are required to update their local regulations prior to the effective dates.
Where else what?
Or else failure to do this will result in suspension from the NFIP.
It will result in suspension.
For who?
For who, the
The
town?
town.
The town.
Yeah, right, for who?
Yes.
I'm not a signatory to that program.
Right.
Well, I think what they're talking about is there's FEMA insurance and there's private insurance,
Exactly.
which provides for equivalent to flood insurance. And at many occasions cheaper than the federal policy, because the feds do not want to get into flood insurance. They're losing their butts.
What would be helpful, Andrew, is a town meeting, if town council could actually explain these other cases, because everyone's gonna have the same question. What does it mean if we do and don't? Just head that off at the
Yeah.
pass.
What, one other point on 10.1.4, that last sentence that you had in here that was added.
Yep. That was the
10.1.4.1.
Was a very
Variance
nice
to eliminate insurance costs
last
and the minimum action necessary or something like that.
prohibitive, we added the Reading edit, because these edits are from the town, but if there was any edits from Reading specifically, from this board, I believe that was the one that you.
that was the prohibited use.
The entire second sentence in the first paragraph. The entire second sentence.
Sorry, are we talking about the same thing here? Yeah.
I don't think so.
Do you know what,
I thought it was,
10141.
So 10141 is a question in terms of that we'll take back to DCR on this letter that the town must require to send and why we have to refer back to specific rates, and if we can remove this or further clarify this locally. What we added was this use is not explicitly described in section 10162 are prohibited, but we were gonna remove that at the next iteration.
So by when do you need to send that letter? Before they file? As they file?
Right.
After it's permitted?
Mhm.
What happens if you don't?
yeah, I think that was the one place where basically we're asking DCR if we can maybe improve upon the model bylaw. And also, when we take this to town meeting, something I need to think about this a little bit more. Something to maybe add to the introduction is in plain language where this bylaw is becoming in fact more restrictive, because it's not. I think my read of this is not becoming more restrictive. That's why I need to think about it. But I think for a town meeting, it's helpful to know, like, how is this actually changing what myself or my neighbor will be able to do on the ground? I need to think about this in its entirety, but that might be a kind of a nice summary thing to convey.
I would couch it as some of the changes that we picked up.
Yeah, they're not exhaustive. We're advising what we caught, but check
Yeah.
FEMA.
Mhm.
What if we gave a list of streets where the changes impacted some or all of the street and said, now you're noticed, you live on that street, you go check the map. In other words, we've gone about as far as we can go without a real map.
I think they did it in more of a broad swipe.
Right.
But do it at town meeting. Tell them what you told them, and tell them,
Mhm.
over communicate.
Mhm.
I think at that point though, John, like a vote needs to happen. They don't have time to figure it out.
yeah, you're there to vote.
Yeah, I
You're there to vote.
People will come in and not having.
But I guess I would really suggest having that information be online and for all the
Even
time
better.
you've been spending, so that people will look ahead of time. Just like we've tried to do tonight, I think we can't invite town meeting to get hung up on who's affected and who's not.
But they're gonna ask that question anyway. If you say, look at page 4, if you still have a question, raise your hand.
Yeah,
Then you can kill most of that curiosity right out of it.
I think if you tell anybody affected, my advice would be tell everybody who's affected by that, which even if you
Exactly.
perceive it to be. Then you're gonna minimize how many of those people are in town meeting, and then you're gonna have a narrower subset of folks on that vote. 'Cause some
It
folks-
doesn't affect whether you vote for this. It just says you may be among those affected.
and whether or not you're affected by this doesn't actually make a material difference in whether the town should update this bylaw. Basically, if you're affected, you should want this bylaw to be updated.
I spoke earlier, the line I was talking was 10.1.6.4.
Yeah, and that's the
I'm
one
sorry.
we removed.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. Sorry, just to go back, that ask was the geographies described should be more specific if we can help it, and it's not like directly abutting roads.
Did you do like 300 feet? Is that what you did from? What was the circle you do?
I think we did immediately adjacent,
You did households? By household, by address. Maybe you already have the data, just republish it again.
yeah.
I just thought of another way to phrase this at some point, along with like, tell them what you're gonna tell them, give them the information, let them know. Passing this bylaw isn't going to change whether or not somebody is affected. I think that's the thing. People aren't going to be able to change whether or not they're affected by whether or not they pass this bylaw. That's happened somewhere else.
Right, and the maps aren't going to be ratified until July, right?
Right.
So we can only say what we know
What
at
we
this
expect.
time.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Because, I mean, you see it happen all the time, like. You think you're gonna do something and then the map comes and it's very different.
And
They're not
as
still
Guy
cha-
pointed
They're not still
out,
changing the maps.
They're not
Not to
ratified.
my knowledge.
they're not,
They're
they're
not.
not
I mean,
finalized.
They're not
That's-
ratified yet,
You could change.
That's
alter a
why I
map.
said if we could wait, but we can't wait.
We
till
but we
November.
can't wait.
Because we don't have town meeting on July 9th.
I know that.
Right.
But if you could alter a map ahead of, but
No, they
And
can't.
because
wait.
10-year-old
you'd
maps
have
are
to,
changing.
you'd have to.
No, they say pending.
Pending, but if you had an appeal now would probably be a lot easier than an appeal later, even if it's possible.
I don't think that's true.
Why did they change the orange zone to just disappear? All of a sudden, it's been there for 500 years or whatever.
Well, because floodings happen more frequently. So that's right. This is where having the flood insurance study, I mean, I haven't read the flood insurance study, but having the flood insurance study available for people to be able to answer that question and look at it. Yeah, what's changing is that an area that isn't expected to get flooded every 500 years is now expected to get flooded every 100 years.
In some
or more
places.
frequently. In some
In some
places.
cases,
yeah.
yeah.
I think,
In some
I think the
cases.
date, I think the data's changed. They have more to go off.
Yeah.
I think that's why I said, read that study. I think I would
Yeah.
encourage everybody to read the study.
So if I remember correctly, and I'll look more into this, but I do believe the maps, like a final determination has been issued, and that was in late 2024, early 2025. And they just put the effective date towards July, I believe, to give communities catch up time.
Oh,
Okay,
I
they're
think,
not still
I
out there, because I've been playing with these in other places.
Mhm.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure they're final.
Okay.
Just,
Let me double check that.
It would be a big ask for somebody to put in the language without knowing what they were.
if, for an example, if you wouldn't mind either one of you plugging in, pulling it up, and then looking at a property and, you know, not so much of a golf course, but just pick an individual property. And then from your opinion, just to define what that map looks like, we'll go through your due diligence that you would do if you had someone came in, like myself or Dave or yourself, and you said, all right, go look at this piece of property, please. How, you tell me what this would look like.
Is that something we should really be doing as part of the hearing? I feel like that's a really good question, and I feel like that should also be done kind of like offline, again, because.
Individuals.
It might be
Because-
helpful though for me to show how
Just do
to
an
use the
illustration,
floodplain, 'cause, like there is
yes.
one too many
Yes.
layers on there.
That is
Um,
perfect, that is perfect, but yes, like, I don't think we should be making a determination on somebody's
Right,
property.
no.
That's why I didn't say specific, I'm not asking for I'll ask him tomorrow.
But
what
let's,
my-
let's see how it works, yes.
But yeah,
So let me just revise this. So if and when you click the link for the flood change map, this is your starting point nationwide. What we would do is,
Address.
I mean, I just know
Can only get
the
you-
road that I know has some change around it, John Carver Road. So I'll do John Carver Road, Reading, Mass.
It only gets you to Reading, you have to drive there.
So I'm gonna zoom out a little bit. What's important here is the layers button. There's quite a few number of layers, and there's only two that really matter to determine the changes here. And that's gonna be the second layer here, and the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5th layer down. Cut the right, yeah. So if we look at the 5th layer, this is the national flood hazard layer. This is the existing flood zone in Reading, the map already shown earlier. If I were to turn this off and go back to the pending national flood hazard layer, now you can see the new districts and boundaries of the floodplain. So if you wanted to look at an area of interest, say your own parcel, what you would do is probably have both tabs on.
Flip between them.
And flip between them, exactly. So we can see up here. Just zoom in a little bit.
That'd be right there is great.
That's a
Yeah,
that's
really
what
good
you
one
need.
for the area behind the
So-
baseball field there.
Proposed,
So this is existing. This is proposed, and you can see if you overlap the two, the X here is turning to A, and some of the boundaries are slightly modified.
so all that it's saying there is, this was already a flood zone.
Mhm.
The boundary of it's changed a bit. Okay, and the propensity for that area flooding was once every 500, once every 500 years,
Mhm.
now once every 100 years.
So this is a case where I would, if a homeowner abutting this road or close to down here question their next steps, I would say call your local insurer. And because I don't know necessarily if it means anything that your structure isn't in there, right? But you should call them nonetheless and determine if you're in this area to the right and zone X is completely disappearing. It's almost nothing you have to do. You're no longer in the floodplain.
You may be upland from that, and that's less of a concern,
Mhm.
right?
So I know you're very, very busy.
That's
I also know that not everybody, like most people, are not adept at or comfortable with
Actually why
like
we
layers
did
on a
share
map
the
like
link,
that. Is it possible for you to make like a little video showing like these are the things that you want to look at?
I can find someone else to do the voice. I'm more than happy to.
What you just showed there about how these are the boxes that you want to
Yeah.
check, these are the important ones out of all of
I
these.
can probably clip what I
It's
just
recorded,
did,
just clip it.
yeah.
That would be very cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, like you were just doing that. You could probably just take that little video right there.
Yeah, but it's not the easiest tool to use, and that's why we do recommend trying to call or come in, and we're happy to just plug in an address and at least get a quick glance at what is changing.
But again, nothing's a guarantee, you still have to call your insurance.
Right.
Yeah, and that may not be precise
Mhm.
and we're not giving insurance. How are we doing, everyone? Have we gone through what we need to go through? Any outstanding questions in the room or online?
Numbers staggered on Zoom, but no questions.
All right. So, next step is we have you listed out a number of items. We'll take another run at this. What's the time frame for the warrant for town meeting again?
So this is on the warrant. We would like to get the language as early as possible to town meeting members. But it feels like at your pre-existing April 14th meeting, we could potentially continue this to, and if there's really a need for a third meeting, we can try to schedule one in. But ideally, yeah, we would wrap this up on April 14th if we can help it.
Yeah, I think because we're talking about some changes, having that be on the agenda for April 14th.
Yeah.
Okay,
We have to vote
so
on
what
it.
do we do? Do we
So that would
do
actually
we
look at the
close
motion
this
to
hearing or
continue the
continue
hearing.
this?
Yeah.
Okay.
I'll make a motion to continue the hearing on the, what was it called? The proposed zoning bylaw amendments to the floodplain overlay district to April 14th, next CPDC.
I'll second.
Okay, and we're all in person, so all those in favor?
Yes.
And
If I can just clarify too, there's not a new notice that goes out for that continuance. So if you can tell your friends, neighbors in the floodplain, if they have questions, please reach out to us anytime from now to then, or attend the meeting or anything, or both, or anything in between. So.
yes.
Thank you. Yeah.
I'll also just make a PSA, we're sitting in the room with all of the voting booths here. Everybody online and at home, remember, early voting has started.
Good plug.
I voted too much.
That's all?
Make a motion to adjourn.
I'll second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
And this meeting is adjourned, thank you.
All right,
Thank you very
thank you,
much.
everybody.
Thank you,
everybody.
Thank you. Thank you. Good night, Jack. Good night.
Thanks,
Thank
Dave.
you.
But
Thank you.
yeah, please reach out. Yeah, our cards are right out there.
Yeah.
Walter.
I'm-
I have to apologize for something you don't even know, because Tom Durkin introduced us years and years
Yes.
ago.
Yeah.
I have a difficult time calling you by name at the meeting, because I just want to call you Coulter. and I know
Oh, that is
that's
so
not what I
funny.
should do.
Yeah, it's- you can do that. I'm on the whiteboard. I don't care what you call me.